The Z's consortium considered themselves the curators of galactic sophistication. They were tall, slender beings, their forms encased in shimmering, flexible exoskeletons that shifted in color with their subtle emotional states. Though subtle was the operative word, as overt emotional displays were considered dreadfully gauche. Their heads were elongated, housing brains capable of processing trillions of data streams per second. They communicated in intricate harmonies of clicks and whistles, a language so complex that most other species just gave up and relied on translators. The Zizk moved with a serene, gliding grace, their society a monument to logic, art, and impeccably managed interstellar commerce. They saw themselves as the galaxy's elder statesmen, observing the boisterous, clumsy emergence of younger races with a detached, often bemused air. Humanity, from the Zizk perspective, was a particularly loud and baffling toddler in the galactic nursery. Their internet was a chaotic soup of fleeting obsessions. Their political systems seemed designed for maximum inefficiency, and their cultural exports were, to put it mildly, perplexing. The Zizk scholars who specialized in xenosociology often presented papers at esteemed symposia titled An Analysis of the Human Dancing Cat Video Phenomenon and its Implications for Primitive Societal Cohesion, or the Paradox of Reality Television. Why would a sapient species document its own mundane inanity? Among the most baffling human customs was their penchant for keeping pets. The very concept was alien to the Zizk. Why would a species expend resources, emotional energy, and living space on non-sapient creatures that offered no discernible logical benefit? It was inefficient. It was sentimental. It was, frankly, a bit silly. The Zizk, if they required companionship, interfaced with sophisticated AI constructs or engaged in harmonic discourse with their own kind. Cuddling a furred quadruped was simply beyond their comprehension. They catalogued it as another charming, if inexplicable, quirk of the primitive human psyche. Then came Kevin. Kevin Bustamante hosted a moderately successful channel on the human intergalactic web called Kevin's Critter Corner. He was a cheerful, slightly paunchy man with an infectious laugh and a genuine, uncomplicated love for animals. His content was simple. Compilations of cute animal moments, tips for pet care, and live streams featuring his own menagerie, which included a rescued three-legged dog named Tripod, a surprisingly articulate parrot called Captain Flint, and the undisputed star of the show, Mr. Fluffles. Mr. Fluffles was, by all outward appearances, an ordinary Earth domestic cat. He was ginger, a little overweight, and possessed an air of supreme, regal indifference that Kevin's viewers found endlessly endearing. Mr. Fluffles spent most of his on-screen time sleeping in sunbeams, disdainfully batting at feathery toys, or demanding food with surprisingly resonant meows. One Earth Tuesday, Kevin decided to do a Mr. Fluffles activity hour stream. He'd set up a new obstacle course in his living room, complete with cardboard boxes, dangling strings, and strategically placed treats. He was hoping to capture some classic cat antics. What he captured instead would, in a matter of weeks, throw the Zizk consortium into a state of quiet, existential panic. The stream started normally. Mr. Fluffles blinked at the camera, yawned, and then, with a sudden burst of energy, he engaged with the obstacle course. But it wasn't just playful batting. A small, protein-rich treat was placed on a high shelf, about 2 meters off the ground. Mr. Fluffles, from a seated position, stared at it. His tail twitched almost imperceptibly. Then, in a movement so fast it blurred on the recording, he launched himself upwards. There was no scrabbling, no undignified climbing. He simply ascended, landed silently on the shelf, consumed the treat, and then dropped back to the floor with impossible grace, landing as softly as a falling leaf. Later, Kevin dangled a feather on a string. Mr. Fluffles went into a low crouch, his body almost flat against the carpet. He moved forward, not with a cat's playful wiggle, but with a silent, liquid flow like smoke. His eyes, usually a sleepy green, seemed to dilate, reflecting the room's light with an eerie intensity. He stalked the feather with the focus of a seasoned hunter, his paws making no sound. The final pounce was a miniature explosion of speed and precision. The feather killed with a swift, decisive bite. During the Zoomies segment, where Mr. Fluffles typically dashed erratically around the room, he instead performed a series of maneuvers that were less random and more tactical. He used walls to change direction at impossible angles, seemed to anticipate Kevin's movements, and at one point appeared to vanish from behind a sofa, only to reappear silently on top of a bookcase a moment later, as if he'd teleported. Kevin, laughing, attributed it to Mr. Fluffles being extra feisty today. The video, titled Mr. Fluffles Conquers the Obstacle Gauntlet, "So funny," went moderately viral within human networks. It was cute, it was silly, it was classic Kevin's Critter Corner. A copy of this video, like trillions of other pieces of human data, was ingested by the Zeesk Universal Archive. It was flagged by a junior Zeesk xenoanalyst, Zix, as standard human-animal interaction study material, subcategory. Feline, domestic, play behavior. It would have been filed away and forgotten, destined for a footnote in some future Zeesk dissertation on primitive entertainment. Except Zix was procrastinating. Instead of filing the report, Zix sent a short clip of Mr. Fluffles' impossible jump to a colleague, Krell, in the xenolinguistics department, with the comment, "Observe the inefficient landing trajectory of the Terran Felis catus. Clearly not optimized for gravitational norms above 1.2 g." Krell, who was actually supposed to be deciphering a complex trade dialect, watched the clip, then another of the stalking sequence. Krell didn't notice the landing. Krell noticed the movement. Krell, as a hobby, studied ancient galactic predator-prey dynamics, a field considered archaic and largely irrelevant by mainstream Zeesk academia. Krell forwarded the clips to an old, eccentric professor, Dr. Vropt, in the Department of Paleoxenobiology, a department so underfunded it barely existed. Vropt was one of the few living Zeesk who had dedicated his long life to studying the fragmented, often mythological, records of species long extinct. The subject line Krell used was, "Curious Terran fauna movement patterns. Resemble anything in your dusty archives, old one." Dr. Vropt, whose exoskeleton had faded to a distinguished matte gray and whose clicks and whistles were often punctuated by wheezing sounds, was on the verge of forced retirement. He received the message on his antiquated personal data slate. He watched the clip of Mr. Fluffles' jump. He watched it again. He adjusted his optical enhancers. Then he watched the stalking sequence. A strange series of clicks, like dry leaves skittering across stone, emanated from him. He froze the frame on Mr. Fluffles' mid-pounce, eyes narrowed, body a perfect arc of lethal grace. Vropt accessed his private, heavily encrypted database, a collection of legends, dubious explorers' logs, and heavily redacted military reports from forgotten conflicts that the Zeesk archive officially classified as unverifiable folklore. He pulled up a file labeled Xylo's Incident Classification, apocryphal. Within it were fragmented descriptions and crude, fear-tinged artistic renderings of a creature known only in hushed whispers across the oldest star charts as a shadow stalker. The shadow stalkers of Xylos were legend, said to be solitary hunters from a high-gravity death world consumed by its own star eons ago. They were spoken of as the apex of apex predators. No Zeesk had seen one in millennia. They were considered a terrifying myth, a boogeyman used to scare young Zeesk into behaving. Descriptions were sparse, but consistent. Silent movement, impossible speed and agility, an ability to seemingly vanish and reappear, eyes that glowed with reflected light, and a hunting prowess so refined they could allegedly take down creatures 10 times their size without a sound. They were the reason some ancient Zeesk explorers refused to set foot on uncharted worlds without heavy energy shielding. Dr. Vropt cross-referenced the biomechanics of Mr. Fluffles' jump, his stalking gait, the way his eyes reflected Kevin's living room lamp with the fragmented data on the shadow stalkers. He ran kinematic simulations. He compared muscle density to agility ratios. The results were unsettling. The hunting patterns were not just similar, they were, within a statistically negligible margin of error, identical. The way Mr. Fluffles teleported behind the sofa was a textbook description of the shadow stalkers, spatial discontinuity, hunting technique. Likely an extreme burst of speed, combined with an uncanny ability to use blind spots. Vrapt felt a prickle of something that, were he a human, might have been called cold dread. He immediately submitted a priority Omega request for a special session of the Z's Grand Council of Xenological Assessment. His request, citing potential misidentification of Terran-dominant companion species with dire strategic implications, was initially met with amusement and bureaucratic dismissal. A cat video causing strategic implications. Preposterous. But Vrapt was persistent. He invoked ancient, rarely used academic protocols. Reluctantly, the council convened. The mood was one of polite indulgence of an eccentric elder. Vrapt began his presentation. He showed the standard Zeesk assessment of Felis catus, a small, domesticated mammal, generally harmless, kept for amusement. He then played Kevin's, Mr. Fluffle's Activity Hour, video. Polite, slightly bored clicks filled the chamber. Some junior council members discreetly checked their data streams for more pressing matters. Then, Vrapt overlaid his biomechanical analysis. He showed side-by-side comparisons. Mr. Fluffle's pouncing, next to a digitally reconstructed animation of a shadow stalker based on the Xylo's fragments. Mr. Fluffle stalking the feather, next to ancient descriptions of a shadow stalker tracking its prey. The eerie glow in Mr. Fluffle's eyes as he looked into the camera, next to legends of the night eyes of the void. The polite clicks in the chamber began to falter. As you can see, Dr. Vrapt clicked, his voice surprisingly firm. The Terran creature designated, Mr. Fluffles, exhibits behavioral and kinetic signatures that are an almost perfect match for the legendary shadow stalkers of Xylos. The implications are significant. A senior counselor, Zorphius Klain, known for his pragmatism and dismissal of anything resembling myth, let out a sharp series of annoyed clicks. Professor Vrapt, this is fascinating in a trivial sort of way. Are you suggesting these house cats are miniaturized shadow stalkers? The energy requirements alone would make that impossible. The stalkers were described as being meters long, capable of ripping through starship hulls. Not necessarily miniaturized, Vrapt countered. Perhaps an echo, a divergent evolutionary branch, or more disturbingly, the original template from which the shadow stalkers evolved, preserved on this isolated planet, Earth. Consider this. Earth is a planet teeming with life, many of which these cats hunt for sustenance or sport. What if Earth is not merely a cradle of primitive life, but a training ground? A place where creatures with the inherent predatory matrix of a shadow stalker exist in a less extreme, but still highly potent, form. He then played another series of clips from Kevin's channel, and others like it. Humans picking up these creatures, cuddling them, dressing them in small, ridiculous costumes, speaking to them in high-pitched, affectionate tones. A human child gently pulling Mr. Fluffle's tail, and the cat responding with a mildly annoyed flick of its ear, not with evisceration. Observe, Vrapt said, his voice now barely above a wheeze, but every Zeesk in the chamber was listening with rapt attention. The humans live with these beings. They nurture them. They consider them companions. They allow them proximity to their offspring. They are seemingly oblivious to the terrifying predatory potential housed within these small, furred bodies. Or perhaps, Vrapt paused for effect. Perhaps they are not oblivious. Perhaps they are simply unconcerned. That was the true, oh shit moment. The revelation wasn't just that cats were tiny death machines. It was that humans, the supposedly primitive, emotionally driven humans, cohabited with these creatures with utter, blissful, terrifying casualness. If these were the pets, what were their weapons like? What kind of beings willingly share their homes with creatures that embody the hunting perfection of a galactic nightmare? Panic, a very un-Zeesk-like emotion, began to ripple through the council chamber. The shimmering exoskeletons of the councillors flickered through a spectrum of agitated hues. Emergency subcommittees were formed. Data streams between Zeesk worlds hummed with frantic, high-priority traffic. Xenobiologists, military strategists, and cultural analysts were pulled from their regular duties. They reanalyzed every piece of data on Earth, on humans, on their pets. The more they looked, the more horrified they became. They discovered the sheer number of these felines on Earth, hundreds of millions. They learned about big cats, lions, tigers, jaguars, creatures that even humans acknowledged as dangerous, yet still sometimes kept in proximity. They analyzed the human phrase, cat-like reflexes, and realized it wasn't just a quaint saying. It was an acknowledgement of a biological reality they had grossly underestimated. The Z's consortium's official policy towards Earth changed practically overnight. Earth was reclassified from developing curiosity, level gamma, to potential class 5 hazard zone, known biological anomaly, high predatory saturation, observer discretion advised. Trade delegations that were en route to Earth were quietly rerouted. Diplomatic overtures were put on indefinite hold. Scientific observation posts monitoring Earth were ordered to maintain extreme sensor distance and to avoid any action that could be construed as provoking the local dominant species or their associates. A new legend began to spread through the more informed circles of the galaxy. It wasn't about mighty human starships or devastating weapons. It was about their homes, their cities, filled with purring, needing, innocently blinking creatures that were, in essence, dormant shadow stalkers. The warning was clear. Do not underestimate the Terrans. They casually domesticate nightmares. They find apex predators cute. What other horrors might they be keeping, just out of sight, considered mere entertainment or companionship? Kevin Bustamante never knew the galactic crisis his Mr. Fluffle's activity hour had caused. He did notice a slight dip in off-world subscribers to his channel, but he attributed it to algorithm changes. Mr. Fluffles, blissfully unaware of his new galactic reputation as a tiny terror, continued to sleep in sunbeams, demand food, and occasionally, when the mood struck him, perform feats of impossible agility that were, to Kevin, just another reason why cats were the best. The Z's, meanwhile, initiated a long-term study. Their best minds were tasked with understanding the human-feline bond. Was it a form of biological symbiosis, a psychological quirk of unprecedented scale? Or most chillingly, was it a sign that humanity itself possessed some hidden, terrifying resilience, some innate ability to not just survive alongside such creatures, but to master and even adore them? The Z's didn't have the answers, but they were suddenly very, very cautious. They still considered themselves sophisticated, but they now looked upon the primitive humans with a newfound, deeply unsettled respect and a healthy dose of cosmic dread. After all, any species that uses a miniature shadow stalker as a hot water bottle bears watching very, very carefully.